You know, there's a lot of places in Florida where you'll find film history, but I don't think there's any place more historic than the Kennedy Space Center. Not only have there been quite a few films that have chosen to use the Kennedy Space Center as a location for filming, but the Kennedy Space Center itself, in a way, has been its own kind of film studio. So today on the Vintage Filmmaker, I thought we would take a trip to space. Space. Hi everyone, I'm Andy the Vintage Filmmaker and welcome to my channel. I love to talk about movies and vintage filmmaking, and I also love vintage photography. So that's what you're gonna find here on this channel. I also want to thank you all for your amazing support. I can't believe we've grown the channel past 2,000 subscribers. This is incredible. I have 2.2 thousand subscribers. I'm sorry to interrupt this important broadcast, travelers. This is Andy from the future. Apparently, at the last recorded video, I was incorrect in my subscriber-based numbers. The space-time continuum has been altered, and I now have double the number of subscribers mentioned previously when I recorded this video. I don't know how the space-time continuum has been altered like this, but all I can say is thank you. And please like, share, and subscribe for more. Now, I have to get back to the video. In this particular episode, I am going to talk a bit about analog photography, but that comes later. Right now, let's talk about the Kennedy Space Center. So if you're unfamiliar, since 1968, the Kennedy Space Center has been NASA's primary launch center of American space flight. Located on the east coast of Merritt Island, Florida, all Project Mercury and Project Gemini flights took off from the then Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. Everything from Apollo to Skylab, the space shuttle, has been launched from the Kennedy Space Center, specifically Launch Complex 39. In addition to manned operations, the center manages launch of robotic and commercial crew missions to this day. There are about 700 facilities and buildings grouped throughout the center on its 144,000 acres. Chief among them is the 525-foot tall Vehicle Assembly Building. You can't miss it. As soon as you come over the bridge, you see it immediately and you know, oh man, this is for real. The VAB, although it's cavernous in size, when you're looking at it along the coast, it doesn't strike you as all that big of a building, and that's simply because there are no other buildings out there for your eye to compare it or judge it against. Whenever you go to the center and you get on the tour bus and they head out towards the VAB, my favorite quote is when they say, if you look at the American flag painted on the side of the building, those stripes are actually wide enough for us to drive this bus down. And that's usually when people who have never been to the center before, it dawns on them, oh, what? Like, that building is huge. In the 6th grade, I went to the Kennedy Space Center on a school trip. And this is a true story. If any of my friends from the 6th grade are watching, they'll remember how hopelessly nerdy I was. I was not the most popular kid in the class, but what they did know about me was they knew my Uncle John worked at the actual Kennedy Space Center. When we got there to like the rocket garden, here comes my Uncle John who works for NASA. And I got to eat lunch with him, and they all were like, oh my gosh, a real like NASA guy. Like, it was validating that I was like, see? But I couldn't contain my excitement. And even there in the rocket garden, a lot of my class started like asking me questions about, well, what's that rocket? And I'm like, that? Oh my gosh, how do you not know what that is? That's a Redstone. That was the first rocket that carried an American astronaut into space. This was a suborbital rocket, so it didn't go orbit around the Earth. That wouldn't come until this rocket, the Atlas rocket, which carried John Glenn, who everybody thinks is the first American astronaut in space, but he wasn't. That was Alan Shepard on the Redstone over here. And I just started going like that, and I literally gave an impromptu tour.
Now this is the first stage of the Saturn V rocket. 127 feet long, and has more power than one F-1 rocket engine than in 200 F-18 fighter jets.
As a Floridian, aside from what we're known for, like Florida Man and alligators and mosquitoes and Disney, I feel that the thing I'm most proud of living in Florida is the fact that humankind first ventured to the moon from here, where I live. That's kind of cool. I have been a space nerd for as long as I've been a film nerd. And those two things have kind of intertwined. And I can tell you exactly why. It's because of one movie. And that movie was called Apollo 13. Give me a break. I love that movie so much. I saw it in the theater when it came out. And it's one of those movies that had such a lasting impression and just kind of changed the course of my life. Because from that moment on, I was a space nerd. I remember that movie coming out and it being such a big deal. I remember a KFC commercial where the dad is walking down the driveway in slow motion with a bucket of KFC.
To celebrate Apollo 13,
it was peak mid-90s cinema and one of the greatest films of all time. You really should see it if you haven't seen it. Recently, it was re-released in IMAX, and I saw it twice because that's how much I love that movie. And yes, I do already own the movie. In fact, I was watching Apollo 13 the other day, and granted, it's not a documentary, but there was a scene where I noticed one of my cameras that I now own was in the movie. It's an Aricon 600. Can't wait to share more of that content, which is coming. So please support the channel. But what about the movies? Well, the first space movie that used the Kennedy Space Center as a location was Frankenstein Meets the Space Monster in 1965.
Beautiful, Adam. Let's hope your creation doesn't fall apart.
Aside from that, there's The Reluctant Astronaut, starring Don Knotts.
Not yet! I'm not in!
Well, fun fact, really quick, Don Knotts was made famous by The Andy Griffith Show.
Starring Andy Griffith.
On The Andy Griffith Show was a little child actor, Ron Howard.
With Ronnie Howard.
Ron Howard would then grow up to become the director of the film Apollo 13. Of course, James Bond himself visited the Kennedy Space Center for the filming of Moonraker. Another film that is near and dear to my childhood is Spaceflight from 1986.
An impossible mistake launched them into space. The adventure of their lives will be getting back home.
It's kind of a cult classic, but I'll watch it right now. I friggin' love that movie. This movie stars a lot of familiar faces from the 80s. People like Kate Capshaw, who played a character named Andy. Leah Thompson of Back to the Future fame. And this was the film debut for a little-known actor named Leaf Phoenix, who you might know better as Joaquin Phoenix. Highly recommend seeing it. I saw it in my childhood. I wanted the little robot guy. I was very bummed to find out that NASA doesn't actually have little robot friends that can follow you around into space. Still. A lot of other films like the movie Contact, directed by Robert Zemeckis of Back to the Future fame, also famous for directing a little movie called Forrest Gump, starring Tom Hanks and Gary Sinise, both who were in Apollo 13. By the way, did you know another cast member in Apollo 13 was famous actor Kevin Bacon, and I'm actually related to him.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Another big blockbuster movie that was filmed at the Kennedy Space Center was the 1998 summer blockbuster movie Armageddon, which is just pure bayhem, just such a Michael Bay film. And oddly, for as campy and as unrealistic as that movie is, the production of that movie had unprecedented access to all of NASA's facilities, including a launch sequence at the Kennedy Space Center where the director of photography, John Schwartzman, had a very small window of time to set up cinema cameras that would be remotely triggered to capture a real live space shuttle launch. And Hollywood doesn't really get that many opportunities to film out there, so this was quite the experience. I feel like if you're in video production or in the industry long enough, specifically here in Central Florida, you're gonna wind up at the Space Center. And on one of those visits, we were right next to these helicopter pilots. NASA has a lot of UH-1 Huey helicopters, which if you watched my previous video, you know I have a fondness for because that was a big part of my career growing up. And just sitting around talking to these guys, I go, what's the most fun you've ever had? The most fun we ever had was filming the movie Armageddon. And I was like, yes. other movies. Michael Bay would return to the Cape to shoot Transformers Dark of the Moon. The Disney movie Tomorrowland, there's a pretty significant scene that's shot there. The film Space Cowboys, a movie that stars and was directed by Clint Eastwood, co-starring Tommy Lee Jones, among other famous actors. It's all fictitious and it's about old guys, old timers into space and them getting their time. But it's fun. The gratuitous use of the song Fly Me to the Moon, I won't spoil it, which ironically would also be a movie that came out not too long ago, starring Scarlett Johansson and the other guy, Tatum.
What?
And then lastly, the movie First Man about Neil Armstrong, starring Ryan Gosling, which is a really cool movie. I highly recommend it, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite space movie because there can only be one favorite space movie, and that's Apollo 13. Now, in addition to the vehicle assembly building and all the facilities there at the Kennedy Space Center, one thing I bet you didn't know was how many cameras were used to film each launch. Over 120 cameras covered every single angle from below the rocket, above the rocket. These were high-speed engineering cameras, each one shooting film, hundreds of frames a second, if not thousands of frames per second. I think on the Mobile Launch Service Tower alone, there was something like 20 cameras. And that's in addition to, say, the tracking cameras that filmed the actual launch going up per rocket. So every launch was an opportunity for movie cameras to roll. Think about all that film that they had to use. It's pretty crazy. You take a rocket like the Saturn V rocket. It has a very distinct look. It's painted black and white. It's got these strange markings on it. That was by design so it could be tracked by cameras and so that you had a reference point for what part of the rocket this was. So literally, they built these rockets to be photographed, to be filmed. Isn't that something? The other thing is the Saturn V rocket itself. We've all seen these glorious images of it separating. But did you ever stop to think about how did they get those shots? The way they got them was by engineers designing what is essentially a re-entry vehicle to bring the camera back. And it was a whole housing. And as it was getting to the end of the roll, ejected itself from the spacecraft to be recovered by the Navy in the ocean. Like, that's crazy. You know, like, what film can do is really something. And if you actually watch some of these spacecraft separation moments, watch it to the end of the actual reel, and you'll see the camera be jut out of the spacecraft. Not to mention that we developed different types of cameras to go to the moon. Not only to be used in space, but to film the astronauts on the moon. They took lots of 16mm movie cameras to the moon. Oh, yeah. But they also took Hasselblad medium format film cameras, designed specifically for the astronauts. You'll see them in photographs all the time. They'll be like mounted here on their chest.
And the camera's running, Joe. Remind me to turn it off when it runs out of film.
Now, I didn't bring a camera specifically used to film astronauts on the moon. But on my last trip to the Kennedy Space Center, I did in fact bring along a medium format camera. The last time I went to the Kennedy Space Center was this year, and it was around July. And if you know anything about your space nerd history, you know that July 20th, 1969 is the anniversary of the first moon landing. So not wanting to miss an opportunity, I of course brought some film along. Rather than photograph any astronauts or moon rocks, I decided to film something as equally out of this world, the Vocalitas. Very close friends of mine and no strangers to this channel. They were actually out there doing some fantastic work as always, entertaining the crowds and really selling a retro 60s vibe. We were there multiple days and it was so much fun. Oh, hi. I brought this Super 8 movie camera, which is that movie camera. I felt this was appropriately vintage. To be honest, it was really, really tricky to try and shoot them. We were in a pretty dodgy area to be shooting film. They weren't in the bright light, they were kind of under a canopy. But for the most part, I think I did pretty well. The other camera that I brought along with me was this little number. These little things are a lot of fun. You see these in antique stores all the time, various versions of them. They're very, very portable, first of all. They fold up thusly. It has like a sight that just bloop, flips open. And it also has an old style waist level reflex viewfinder. So if you ever see these kind of fold up Kodak cameras, know that they spanned for decades and decades. There's many, many different types. The specific one that I have is called a Kodak Vigilant 620. The Kodak Vigilant was manufactured between 1939 and 1949 and originally sold in the US for $38. I got this camera a long time ago. And you look at a camera like this and you immediately think there's no way that it still works. These things were built so dead simple that if you know just the basics about them, you can probably get it to work. With that said, it doesn't mean they work perfectly. To me, that's part of the character. Think of the history that that camera has lived. You know, I'll clean these things, but I won't really fix them up too much because to me, they're still telling their story. After I determined if the lens was even functioning, I decided, well, let's put a roll of film in there and see how it goes. And right away, I noticed a little bit of a problem. So this was a spool for 620 film, and as you can see, it rotates just peachy. My problem was, I noticed that the wind, and it wouldn't budge. That could be a problem. So, in desperation, I did what you should never do, you guys. If your camera ever is giving you this much trouble, just stop. Just stop. But I literally would take two hands and just and wind as hard as I can. And you guys, I literally blistered my hands that day. And I kept thinking to myself, uh-oh. So I was really worried the whole time I was taking pictures, but I was still managing. It was painful, but I was still managing to advance it. What I think was happening was the metal itself is warped and pinching on the spool. Uh-oh. Now with that said, I managed to advance every single shot, knowing and anticipating there wouldn't be a single usable shot. But that's why we test, right? And I just wanted to see, would this camera work? So, I dropped off the film to a local place that's literally 5 minutes away from me. Long story short, it worked, but remember what I was saying about the character and the history of the camera and seeing what it could do? You could say there was a lot of character. But there was also something really cool about him. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but it left a very interesting artifact on almost every single photo. And I have my own hypothesis, my own guesses as to why the film looks the way it does. We went to the Apollo Saturn V Center where the extremely impressive Saturn V rocket is all laid out. I've taken many, many pictures and videos of it over my many visits to the Kennedy Space Center. On one of the shots, I took it of just the rocket itself. But when I saw the results, I was taken aback. It looks like the engines are running. Now, I know for a fact this is just a trick of light, but it did give me a kind of unexpected, dreamy quality that I kind of liked. What do you guys think? So this is just one of those things where it's my philosophy of, you know, just try. Just try it. I feel like as photographers and filmmakers, we worry a lot about the quality of an image because we want it to be perfect. But chasing perfection isn't realistic. As photographers, filmmakers, we know so much, and we're constantly trying to learn more about how to improve our craft that we forget sometimes about the art of it. If we try to overdo it, over-manufacture, it doesn't allow for the accidental wonder that comes naturally through this process. So leave room for that. Leave room for things to happen. Some of my best work, to be quite honest, are happy accidents. And in this case, I was literally relying on the film to be some sort of happy accident if anything came out at all. And I think it did. You know, one of the big happy accidents that I felt came out of the whole space program was the film that they took. The original intention of these cameras was for engineering purposes. High-speed photography to see if the umbilicals were releasing at the right time. When these explosive bolts, which released the SRB boosters, the side boosters on the space shuttle, you know, I find that engineering incredible. But what I find even more incredible is that a camera that was engineered to see two halves of a rocket stage gave us some of the most breathtaking footage of the Earth. That's art. It's beautiful. And some of the most incredible photographs ever taken were taken by astronauts. You know, the first selfies in space were taken by Buzz Aldrin on one of his Gemini missions. And he just decided, yeah, I'm gonna take one of me. I love that. I love that about astronauts. They were filmmakers themselves, you know? Granted, they were way overqualified. And those cameras worked so successfully that even somewhat recently on the last Artemis launch, Artemis 1, what cameras do you think they used for the engineering cameras? And they're still running 16mm film today. We think of film as a specific use case, but really it doesn't have a specific use case. It can be used for anything, from home movies to movies on the moon.
Down south, you're going to be very good at photography, Joe.
So that's what I mean by NASA, in a way, was its own film studio. Following this video, if there's more you'd like to know about spaceflight history and the Kennedy Space Center, Amy Shira Teitel is like the best space historian / science communicator on the internet, period. She runs a channel called The Vintage Space. We're not affiliated, I'm just a huge fan. I would like to thank these fine folks right here, somewhere in my video, for supporting me on Patreon. If you like what I'm doing here and you want to support the channel, well, be sure to like and subscribe and share this video with somebody that you think might be a fellow space nerd or a filmmaker or a film history space nerd filmmaker. And if you'd like to directly contribute to the channel, there's a couple of ways to support me. I'll remind you that I now have a website with a merch store. I've never ran a merch store before, but apparently some of you like some of the mugs and the hats and the stickers, which seems to be something that you all particularly like because I had a number of orders with my last video. And just as a reminder, I'm not sponsored in any way other than by you good people. So whatever kind of content you would like me to make, feel free to write a little comment and support me directly via my Patreon, where there is actually an option for you to become a producer for this channel. Well, that's gonna do it for me, folks. I'm Andy, the Vintage Filmmaker, and until next time, here's to seeing a little more vintage in our movies. Space! Space! If you haven't already, I sound so... If you would like... and help the community grow. And if you're one of them, I can't thank you enough. And if you're not one of them, why not? Well, are you too good? You too good to become a subscriber? Yeah. Thanks. Really, it's so cool. I just can't do this. I'm Andy the Vintage. Nope. And I'll do one more. Well, no, I won't. I said I would only film for an hour. You fool. You have more. You have more to look at. Wow, that was so scientific, Andy. Good job. I'll probably get in there and be like, why I did such a bad job. Thank you, camera companion. Sorry, future Andy.